In the year 2000, the Australian dream felt within reach for most. A median house price of around $250,000 meant a young couple on dual incomes could save for a 20% deposit, which equated to about $50,000 in just 2 or 3 years of steady work. Home ownership for those in their late 20s and early 30s hovered above 60%, a rite of passage as reliable as a backyard Barbie. But over the next quarter century, that dream didn't just slip away. It was systematically dismantled, piece by policy, until today, in 2025. The national median house price has ballooned to over $900,000. In Sydney, it's pushing $1.5 million, a figure that mocks the aspirations of an entire generation. Wages have risen, sure, but only by about 150% since 2000, while house prices are a staggering 300% higher. The price-to-income ratio, once a comfortable 4.3 times the median household earnings, now sits at over 9 nationally and over 12 in capital cities. A barrier so steep that saving for a deposit can literally take a decade or more, trapping young Australians in a cycle of renting or living with parents and regret. This isn't some act of nature, a global force beyond our control. It's the story of deliberate government policies that poured fuel on the fire of demand while choking the life out of supply. Policies that turned housing from essential shelter into a speculative asset, enriching investors and locking out everyone else. And as we stand here in 2025 with home ownership for 25 to 34-year-olds plummeting to just 43%, down from that 60% peak, the human cost is etched in delayed families, mounting debt, and a quiet exodus of the young to cheaper shores. But understanding how we got here is the first step to understanding how it went so wrong. Let's trace the threads. It started with promise. Australia's population surged in the early 2000s, fueled by immigration that averaged 200,000 newcomers a year, a boon for the economy but one we weren't prepared for in bricks and mortar. The Australian Reserve Bank slashed interest rates to historic lows, making borrowing cheaper than ever, and suddenly, everyone from first-timers to flippers could leverage up. By 2010, median prices in major cities had doubled to $500,000. Sydney alone hit $1 million by 2018, with average annual property growth rates touching 8%. Nationally, we saw a 412% rise over 25 years, far outpacing inflation and wages growth, driven by this toxic brew of easy money and unchecked demand. But the real architects were in Canberra and the state capitals, wielding tax codes and planning rules like scalpels on the Australian housing market. Take the Howard government's 1999 capital gains tax discount. Overnight, gains on properties held over a year were halved to just 50% taxable. It was sold as a boost for long-term investment, but it ignited a frenzy. Investors flooded in, chasing tax-free windfalls, their loans surging as they outbid families at auction after auction. Paired with negative gearing, that decades-old perk allowing landlords to deduct rental losses from their salary tax, it created an unbeatable subsidy for speculation. By 2025, investors hold 2.2 million properties in Australia, costing the budget $6.8 billion annually in foregone revenue and inflating prices by 4 to 5% in the process. Studies confirm it. These policies crowd out first-home buyers, especially in the very suburbs where entry-level homes should thrive. Then came the so-called lifelines for buyers, like the 2000 First Home Owner Grant, a $10,000 to $15,000 cash splash to kickstart purchases. Noble intent, but in a supply-starved market, it was dynamite. Sellers simply hiked prices to capture the windfall, and with billions poured in, $22.5 billion from 1964 to 2011 alone, affordability didn't budge. Instead, it got worse. Home ownership for under 35s didn't climb, it cratered. Layer on the supply-side sabotage. Rigid zoning laws in states like New South Wales and Victoria, where low-density zones, think R2 in Sydney or NRZ in Melbourne, where they ban apartments and townhouses in prime areas, preserving character at the expense of families. Slow land releases by councils, sky-high developer fees, and a construction industry bottlenecked by skills shortages meant we built for yesterday's population, not tomorrow's. Immigration added hundreds of thousands annually without matching home build numbers, while foreign buyers, though a smaller slice, tacked on another 0.5 to 1% to city prices. And here is a stark irony in the scarcity: the number of vacant, Australian dwellings has actually swelled since 2001, when about 742,000 private dwellings sat unoccupied on census night, roughly 9.5% of the total stock. By the 2021 census, that figure had climbed to over 1.1 million empty homes, representing nearly 300,000 more vacant houses despite the raging affordability crisis. These aren't just seasonal anomalies. Many linger empty year-round, hoarded as investments or second homes, tightening supply further for those who need them most. Compounding the chokehold, the explosion of short-term rental platforms like Airbnb has diverted even more homes from the long-term market. In 2025, Australia boasts over 174,000 Airbnb listings, with tens of thousands being entire homes that owners deem too lucrative for yearly leases, earning up to 81% more profit than traditional rentals in some spots. The impact is acute in tourist hotspots. In Hobart, for instance, long-term rental availability has plummeted by more than 50% since the platform's rise. As properties flip to weekend warriors instead of families, pushing vacancy rates for leases to historic lows and inflating rents by 2 to 3% in regulated areas. Just a 1% uptick in Airbnb supply can nudge long-term rents higher, a quiet tax on the young scrambling for stability. And don't overlook the quiet thieves like HECS debts from the late 80s and onwards, ballooning to devour savings. And compulsory superannuation rules taking away 10% of a salary and locking it away until 60, when compounded with ballooning house prices, has made saving for a deposit all that more unattainable. By 2018, prices peaked at $571,000 nationally. Even after a pandemic dip, they've roared back, hitting $900,000 plus today as rates ease and demand reignites. The fallout for the young is gut-wrenching. That 20% deposit? In 2001, it was 86% of a year's income. Grind it out with a partner, and you're in. Now it's 135% nationally, over 200% in Sydney, a solo savings slog of 10 to 12 years, and that's if rents don't swallow half your wage first. Renters are hit 30% of their income on average, but for low earners, it's 50% or more, fueling a financial stress crisis where 1.26 million households scrape by one paycheck from eviction. Families delay mental health phrase, and the wealth chasm yawns. Boomers hold 70% of Australian homes, passing tax-free gains to their kids, while millennials and Gen Z inherit nothing. It's not hyperbole to call it intergenerational theft, a system rigged so the house always wins, and it won't be your house because you can't afford the gamble. Yet flickers of change emerged in 2024 and 2025. The federal government banned foreign buyers from purchasing existing homes for 2 years starting April 2025, and the federal government pumped $3 billion more into Housing Australia for increased social builds and expanded shared equity schemes to ease deposits. States like New South Wales nudged zoning reforms, allowing more density in transit corridors. But these are bandages on a hemorrhage. As the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council warned in its 2025 report, we're still short 200,000 homes a year, with rents up 5.5% in the last quarter alone. To rewind to pre-2000 affordability, where houses cost 4 times income, deposits in 2 to 3 years, and ownership a norm by 30, we need bold, systemic surgery. First, unleash more supply. Experts at the Grattan Institute call for an extra 50,000 homes built annually for a decade, slashing prices and rents by up to 20%. That means overhauling zoning nationwide. Scrap height limits and density bans in 80% of urban land, fast-track approvals down to 6 months, and mandate upzoning near transport hubs. Federally, tie infrastructure funding to state build targets. Locally, waive fees for affordable projects. And revive public housing and aim for 100,000 new social and community homes by 2030, targeting low-income renters to free up private stock. Align immigration. Cap net arrivals at levels matching house build completions. Say 150,000 a year until supply catches up, without gutting the economy. Tackle the vacancies head-on with a national register and a 1 to 2% annual tax on long-term empty properties, potentially unlocking 200,000 homes without new builds. And rein in short-term rentals, enforce 90 to 180-day caps in urban and coastal zones, converting just 10 to 20% of those 174,000 listings back to long-term. could ease rental tightness by 5%, as per recent modeling suggests. Second, defang the investor beast. Phase out negative gearing for new purchases over the next 5 years, limiting deductions to actual rental income, saving $2 billion yearly to redirect toward first buyer rebates. Reform capital gains. Lift the discount to 75% for properties under 5 years held, taxing flips like income to curb speculation. Introduce a vacancy tax on empty investor pads to 2% of value annually to push 100,000 idle homes onto the market. These ideas aren't radical. They're proven. Similar tweaks in the 80s briefly cooled the market before politics intervened. For buyers, skip the sugar highs of grants that inflate prices. Instead, expand shared equity to 100,000 households, where government co-owns 40% stake, repayable on sale, dropping effective deposits to 10%. Forgive chunks of HECS debts for service workers and build trades, flooding construction with talent, and incentivize downsizers. Tax breaks for boomers selling big homes to fund smaller homes or units, unlocking equity without the guilt. Implemented together, these could have the price-to-income ratio in a decade, restoring that pre-2000 equilibrium where a deposit is a milestone, not a life sentence. But it demands cross-party spine, no more half measures from Labor or the coalition, both criticized by Grattan for nibbling at edges while supply lags. As the next election looms as a housing referendum, will we choose families over investors? This is the story of Australia's housing heist, but it's unfinished. If this Australian housing story stirred you like it stirred me, then like and subscribe, and drop in comments. What's your fix? Thanks for watching.